Hi, nice to meet you guys. I'm Ariana.
Hey,
Hi, nice to
Ariana.
meet you.
Nice to meet you. So, how did this documentary come about?
Back in the late 2020, as people were kind of emerging from, the nightmarish year that we had all had, I was wanting to do something that was a little bit upbeat and maybe jolly for a film. And I started to research how people become Santa Claus. And there were a couple of different schools around the US, uh, which were all kind of interesting, with Santas and elves. But there was this one actual summer camp for Santa Clauses, where they went and slept in bunk beds and sat around the campfire and went swimming in a lake. And I was just like, I can't believe this exists. How has nobody done a documentary on this? How is any of this real? And then I got them to send a couple of photos and videos and did more research, and it turned out that it was real. So I reached out to them and got a general lay of the land, like, what happens at Santa Camp and what do you teach? And then I was like, is there anything different that is happening at the moment? And with a lot of the events of 2020, they were wanting to, have these big conversations. They were wanting to have these bigger conversations. Sorry. They were wanting to have these bigger conversations about representation. They were wanting to bring in Santas from different backgrounds to address the need that they were increasingly seeing for Santas, from different backgrounds. And so immediately it became clear that this was not only visually very interesting, but it was also a film that dealt with some kind of bigger ideas.
Yes. And Stacey, how did you become part of it?
I was introduced to Nick through some people in film, and we started talking about the idea. And the minute I heard about it, I thought that it was such a great idea for a film. And, again, it had been COVID, and the idea of going to camp with a bunch of filmmakers, it sounded just like a great time, and it was. And I'm very happy that I said yes.
Yes. What I found interesting about the documentary, and even when you're talking about at the end of 2020, they thought maybe they should have more diverse Santas. It's just like no one has considered this before. It was watching it like, of course, there was definitely joyous moments, but there are so many moments of frustration. Like,
Why has it taken this long?
yes, and why even some of the interactions that we saw at camp, some of them rubbed me the wrong way as like a black person, a person who celebrates and needs diversity. To be honest, did you guys have that experience as well of them not being as welcoming as I think they thought they were being in the beginning?
I think that they were very honest about like what their thoughts about these bigger issues were, and some of them are blind spots. Like some of these issues that they haven't given a great deal of thought to. Um, and then there are other Santas that are there that were extremely open and welcoming. Like one of the things that wasn't actually in the film, is um, that there was actually a Santa at camp that approached the trans Santa, and said, I'm an enchanted Santa as well, meaning I'm an LGBTQ plus Santa, and they had felt like they weren't able to be open about that, in their career as a Santa Claus because of prejudices against gay people. And so I think like a lot of these things had been bubbling beneath the surface for a long time. And you know, eh, like with all things, I mean, they when they started to get a lot more requests for Santas from different backgrounds, it was then that they were a bit like, oh, this is this is something that makes sense from every different point of view.
For sure. And the film isn't just at Santa Camp. You actually go to a lot of their first gigs, and there's lots of joyous moments, which are great. And then a lot of not as joyous, and even sometimes just so ridiculous, it's actually somewhat amusing. What are some of the memories that you've had at like these first gigs that you guys were there and were able to see it?
I mean, when we follow the Santas out into the real world, like it's a real roller coaster. There's these moments of like incredible emotional beauty, like when uh, Suki and Finn, who is the Santa with the disability, find out that they're going to be in a parade, and it's spoiler alert. It's just this very wonderful, magical moment. And then there are other moments where, it's extremely confronting. Like when the Santa who's transgender, Levi, does his event in Chicago, protesters show up. The Proud Boys show up because they so strongly oppose the idea of Santa being depicted by a trans person. They show up with signs and their own Santa Claus, and they say we're the Proud Boy elves. I mean, it's bizarre and surreal and a little bit scary in certain parts, but I think it was important to us to include those things because we wanted to show what real life is like for people who are from different backgrounds, and it was also really important to us because especially in the genre of Christmas movies, like there's not a ton of people from different backgrounds. It's still a very homogenous genre of film.
Stacey, did you have any moments either being there or watching the film that really surprised you or even filled you up with joy?
I mean, there are so many moments that filled me up with joy. I loved meeting Chris's daughter, Emily. I love how children are so honest in what they're talking about and how important it was for her to have her father be Santa. I love how his neighbors all rallied in support of him and put up the black inflatable Santas all around the neighborhood as a way to combat hate and the idea of this Confederate flag that's flying, right outside Emily's window. I mean, I could go on and on. There's so much joy in this film.
For sure. Were there any moments where you were checking kind of your own prejudices, or not even just that you're like, oh, I didn't think about that, because Santa, like our first interaction with Santa isn't seeing Santa at the mall. It is all of this media that we consume that we kind of do have an idea in our head at one point in time. Did you guys have any of those? Oh, I never thought that was an issue.
For me, the moment that I was like surprised by, but then for me, the moment where I was like, oh, like I never thought of this, but of course this is a thing, was Mrs. Claus getting equal pay and equal billing and equal recognition. I mean, it's such a universal issue. It's something that that I think women have to deal with in the workplace all the time, and in the greater world. And I wasn't expecting for that to be an issue that came up in the film, but when it was, I was like, oh, of course, of course, these conversations are being had. And yes, it's Mrs. Claus's and they're dressed as Mrs. Claus's, which adds a layer of Christmas magic to it. But these are real conversations.
Yeah. What about you, Stacey?
I was just going to say, I love that you can use what's happening, in everyday life, the issues that are happening around inclusion, around equal pay, around representation, and it all comes up in Santa Camp. And so in a way, the sort of silliness and sweetness of Santa Camp kind of allows you to have conversations that are uncomfortable to have. And I think people are nervous to say the wrong thing. And you even see that in the film, like the Santas are very well intentioned, but they're nervous they're going to say the wrong thing. And I think that many people feel the same way, like they want to say the right thing. And so you can use Santa as an icon and this film as a way, as like a teachable moment of, okay, let's talk about these things, but let's talk about them in a way that's really accessible for people, because, almost everyone celebrates, Christmas or some holiday.
Yes. So the film, we kind of go through a roller coaster of emotions, happiness, sadness, anger, but we end, and I talked to Santa Chris about this a little bit, on Santa Chris performing Notorious B.I.G.'s Juicy. I heard that his wife sent that over to you guys, but why did you guys want to kind of cap the movie with that?
So Chris and I had been talking about, what we would film as the Christmas season, started to take off, and his neighborhood had been filled with these inflatable black Santas. So we'd been talking about let's go and film him walking around and just kind of seeing like the support that the neighbors had shown for him. And then he one day, as we were planning that, sent me this video of himself performing Juicy, and it just felt so like cosmically aligned. Juicy has this like unexpected Christmassy inspirational quality to it. You know, the lyrics say, you know very well who you are, don't let them hold you down, reach for the stars, which as soon as I saw him doing that, I was like, wow, like this just is so like joyous and Christmassy. Like, would you be okay with us filming that? And so when we went down and filmed him reacting to the neighbors and seeing all of the Santas up, we also filmed him doing that. And you know, it looks like a very expensive production. It was actually just me and a camera person. The reason that it looks so kind of lush is because Chris's neighbors had these insane Christmas decorations everywhere, and so that, believe it or not, is a very small, you know, a little bit of a like DIY shoot that just happens to look like a very magical scene.
Yes. And even where you're saying the lyrics, it like summed up the movie in such a beautiful way in everyone's dream and kind of excelling at that. But thank you so much for talking to me about the film and congrats on this premiere. Hope to talk to you about future projects and Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.